What's up, everyone? Jacob Roach back here from Mixing with Metal, and I'm back here today for part 2 on how to mix metal drums. In our last video, we talked about top-down processing, so that was the bus and the parallel drum compression. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you watch that video. The link will be in the description below. And today, we're going to talk about overheads. So after I get my top-down mixing chain rocking, I start with overheads. I know a lot of engineers start with the kick or maybe the snare. I like to start with overheads and then add those things in, and I'll tell you why. Overheads are my view of the drum. So typically I record with a kick pad, and I don't take out a lot of low end of the overheads. I take out some, but I don't go up to like 500 hertz or anything like that because I kind of want an overall image of the drums. They aren't just cymbal mics to me. Okay, and so I think that's really important to consider when mixing drums is what your overheads are intended for. If they're intended just to be a cymbal mic, then you need to work your other drums around that. And if they're intended to be an overall picture of the drums, then again, you'll work your other drums around that. So this is going to be just that. I'll talk a little bit more as we go through on what to do if you're going up to 500 hertz or something like that. But this is how I handle it. So if you don't remember, this is what we were left with when we stopped off last time. Great. Sounds awesome. So typically what I'll do is I'll solo out my overheads and I'll listen to those and see what's going on there. And we ran out of CPU power. Hang on one more time. Sorry for kind of the stuttering there. So awesome. So I'm listening to those. Those sound really great. Again, there's no kick in there. And I'm pretty happy with that sound, but I want to do a few things with it. The first thing is L2. L2 is infamous for being, excuse me. L2 is infamous for being destroying snares. All right, so in the early 2000s, a lot of records were mastered with L2, and it just completely crushed the snare sound. And it's kind of what it's famous for, and you can use that to your advantage. So I'm doing that to tame that snare. If you listen here, you can hear the snare really pops out of those overheads. Right, so I want to tame that just a little bit, just to balance it out. I don't want to crush the snare and destroy it. I just want to balance out the overhead. So I'll start without it and bring it in. It's subtle, but it's bringing that snare just down a little bit and balancing out everything else overall. And that'll make more of an impact later on in our processing. So that's the start out. Next, I have Virtual Mix Rack. Virtual Mix Rack's just adding some preamp saturation. So much like the bus processing, this is just Neve preamps, and I'll bypass that and bring it in. You can hear it just opens up the overheads a little bit more. And when I'm doing this, I am doing it in solo. A lot of guys will tell you not to mix in solo. I don't think it's a big deal to mix in solo. Again, you should reference against everything else. Of course, don't mix entirely in solo, but I don't see there's a problem taking a track and mixing it in solo. I do that all the time, and then I'll reference later on. So I'll be doing this process in solo, and then I'll come back and listen to it in context and see what I need to tweak. Okay, so next plugin, Pro Q2, and I'm just doing some EQ here. So taming that snare, adding a little bit of saturation to open them up, just doing kind of what I would consider natural things to make them sound better, and then moving into my EQ. So bypass the EQ and then bring it in. Oops. All right, so this is the majority of what's happening with the overheads, and let me go to a different part of the song here. This is the majority of the overhead processing. So I'll walk you through this step by step. First thing I have going on is low cut, high pass filter, and I have it set at 80 hertz here. Typically, I'll go and set it between really up to like maybe 150 hertz, but I don't want to lose too much low end because when I'm tracking with a kick pad, I don't have to worry about getting rid of the muddiness of the kick, and I want some punch of the toms, especially in the overheads, and that's why I don't do that far. Let's see. Next here, I have a little cut at 350 hertz around. What that's doing is adding some emphasis right here. So this is where like the low end of the toms is going to be sitting. And let me see if I can find a tom part to show you what I mean. Listen to the toms before and after. Hopefully a part that doesn't skip. Holy crap. All right, that's before, and now this is after. Little bit punchier in the low end there, so dragging some emphasis there. Next, I have a big dip at 5.3, 5.2. I really just up in this harsh region. This is where cymbals are really harsh, and I just do a big old smooth bell. There's a lot of guys who go in and get really surgical with it, and if you get surgical with it, you're going to get a surgical sounding result. I did that for a long time, and then I wondered why my cymbals sounded unnatural, why they sounded harsh, all of that kind of stuff. And the key to that is really just using bigger moves, right? So using not as I could do like a 96 dB per octave thing or whatever, but using a really smooth bell, right? That will give you a more natural sound. So if you're struggling with that, I struggled with that for a really long time, and I found out just doing a natural bell like this with a really smooth slope is the key to kind of making your cymbals sound more natural. And then immediately after that, I'm boosting at like 10K. A lot of that's not going to be super duper audible, but it'll add a little bit of sheen on top. And so, yeah, really simple stuff in the EQ here, but as you can hear, it's doing a lot. I think the most important thing to listen for, and then I have phase flipped because always check your phase with your overheads. But I think something really important with overheads especially is that you're not doing a lot of surgical cutting. You can do some. If there's certain frequency or there's like resonances in the room and stuff like that, it's good to take those out then. But I see a lot of tutorials that say, hey, notch this, notch that, notch, notch, notch. And they're talking about specific resonances or specific frequencies that are really, really irritating. It is not supposed to be a notch fest. You're not supposed to just notch everything. And so the key really is smoother EQ curves to give you a more natural sound, generally speaking. Okay. And then lastly, we have the 4030. Yes, I want to continue my Mic DSP subscription. Why would I ever cancel it? These plugins are awesome. Retro 4030 compressor from Mic DSP, and this is just leveling it out, compressing those overheads a little bit. So I'll bring that out, or I'll take that out and then bring that back in. That is obnoxious. I'm so sorry that that's skipping. I think you should have been able to hear what the difference it was making. But let's step through this really quick. I have a super slow attack, super fast release. I want some transient to come through of the snare and of the initial cymbal hit and all that stuff. Really, this is just kind of taming, right? So if I have a really fast attack, I'm letting that through, and I mean a really slow attack, I'm letting that transient through, and then a really fast release means that I'm letting that compression off really quickly. I'm just really trying to tame some of that resonance, some of that I don't want the cymbals to get too washy. And so that's what this is going to do here, is going to allow the cymbals to sound natural while still compressing that end bit of them. And what I'm looking for is just maybe 4 dB, 3 dB of compression. And really, I think on this mix, I tried out the 4030. I don't usually use this compressor. Overheads are kind of like an open book. I will use any compressor on there. And generally, I try and find something new and just dial it into how it sounds good. There's not really a method that I stick to with overheads, especially when you're getting tracks sent to you to mix, because the room they're recording and the cymbals and the player, everything can change so drastically when you're dealing with an overall image of the kit. So I don't go like super technical with, oh, okay, it needs to have a slow attack and fast release. The fact that it has a slow attack and fast release, don't let that be like the indicator of what you need to do. Maybe start there and then work backwards and see what you need. Okay, and yeah, that's it. That's how my overheads work. So one more time, let me take all these out, and then I'll bring them all back in, and I'll show you that in the context of the drum mix. So it's just little subtle things, right? And you can hear that that's exactly what we're doing. We're taming the snare, which a lot of this is used for. We're taming the snare with the L2 and the compressor. We're opening it up a little bit with some saturation, and then we're using smooth bell cuts to kind of shape the sound to how we want it. We're not getting super surgical with it. And I think that's really important for overheads. Now, what if you're just using them as cymbal mics? I think the same kind of idea applies. You should still be making smooth cuts to them, because the more you get surgical with it, the more unnatural they're going to sound. You're going to be constantly fighting, wanting more top end, or now it's too tinny and stuff like that. I found myself in that situation a lot. And so making those smoother EQ moves will yield a more natural result. So let me show you in the context of the entire drum mix where everything's doing. So again, where we left off last week, this is what we had. So we're pushing, you can really hear how we're pushing those cymbals to the side, right? Pushing the cymbals to the side and opening them up a little bit, and then kind of, sculpting them how we want it. And think about it like that. Think about sculpting them. Don't think about cutting, right? That's where your cymbals start to really fall apart. And I see a lot of people do it, and I did it for a really long time. And in almost every situation, it does not sound good. Yes, get rid of resonances. If you have a particular frequency that's just like, man, that sounds horrible, then sure, get in here and super, super small Q and notch that thing out, right? However, start with this, see where that gets you, and then maybe consider notching things out if something's still bothering you. Don't go and just notch out stuff like crazy, because generally it will yield an unnatural result. And I think I've got on that point for a very long time. So that's what I do for overhead processing, and that's kind of my groundwork. So now that I have my bus processing, now that I have my overhead processing, I know kind of where I'm going to go. Next, I'll go into my kick and my snare and kind of build up the drum kit from there. But now I have a good overall picture of where my drums are heading. Again, if you watched my last video, I talked about how this top-down approach is going to give kind of an image of how the drums are supposed to sound, not necessarily what you want them to sound like. Sometimes we need to kind of just, start mixing and start getting them to sound good, and then see what direction the drums are going in, instead of trying to push them and sculpt them in one weird direction that maybe they aren't going to go into. So now that we, again, have a broader image of what the drums sound like, we can get closer and closer, and that's what we're doing. We're starting really big with the top down, going a little bit closer with the overheads, and now we're going to get into the particular tracks and mix those. So this is part 2 out of this, I think, 5 or 6 part series. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can stay updated as these videos come out. I'm going to be trying to do at least once a week, and then I have a few other things in the works. Gonna maybe be doing guitars, stuff like that, because those videos seem to get a lot of attention. I think a lot of people struggle with guitars, and I struggle with them for a long time. So I have that stuff in the works after I wrap this thing up and get this all out to you guys. Once again, I am taking mix submissions, so if you want your track mixed by me, there's a link in the description below. Also, I'm adding a form to there. If you want your mix critiqued by me, I will do a one-on-one critique with you, and that'll be added below. So once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're almost to 1,000 subscribers, and once we get a little bit closer, I have a really cool thing that I think you guys might be interested in. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, share the videos, and stay tuned. And thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next time.